The gunshot cracked across the forgotten cemetery, splitting the heavy silence of Llano Estacado. Matthew Reid stood with his Winchester still smoking, the brass shell casing hot against the dusty Texas soil. The year was 1884, and the land showed no mercy to those who didn't understand its rules. Before him, a man clutched his shoulder, blood seeping between dirty fingers, his face twisted with pain and hatred. And at Matthew's feet lay something he hadn't expected to find among the dead. A young woman, barely conscious, her dress torn and dirty, her eyes reflecting horrors no person should witness. "I'm not clean anymore," she whispered, the words barely audible against the wind that swept across the barren plain. Matthew Reid, 42 years old, former cavalry captain of the Confederate Army, now a rancher fighting to keep his land after the devastating winter of '83, looked down at the girl and saw something he recognized: survival against impossible odds. He'd seen it in men's eyes during the war. He'd seen it in his own reflection after burying his wife and daughter. The wounded man spat blood onto a grave marker. "You made a mistake, Reid. She's mine. Paid good money for her." Matthew didn't lower his Winchester. His eyes, weathered by sun and hardened by loss, narrowed beneath the brim of his hat. "There's only one mistake here. You're still breathing." The cemetery held its own stories. Victims of the Buffalo Wallow Massacre of '74, when Comanche warriors and Border Patrol soldiers turned the prairie crimson. Matthew had come to visit the simple wooden crosses that marked where his family lay. Instead, he found this girl and the devil who claimed to own her. The wounded man struggled to his feet, his face coming into clearer view. Recognition dawned in Matthew's eyes. "Jackson Blackwood," Matthew said, the name tasting bitter. "Thought you'd be hanging from a tree by now." Blackwood's laugh turned into a pained cough. "And I thought you'd have the sense to die in that war, Reid." His eyes darted to the girl, then back to Matthew. "You don't know what you're stepping into. That girl belongs to me. Her daddy sold her fair and square when his bank failed." "No man can own another," Matthew said, words simple but heavy with conviction. "You shot my brother over stolen horses. Remember that? 5 years ago?" Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "This ain't about the girl. This is about settling scores." Matthew didn't flinch. "Your brother chose to steal. You chose to come here. Seems poor decision-making runs in your family." Blackwood's hand inched toward his holster. Matthew fired again without hesitation. The bullet tore through Blackwood's arm, sending his Colt Navy spinning into the dirt. The outlaw staggered backward, clutching his fresh wound. "Next one goes between your eyes," Matthew said calmly. Blackwood, knowing he was outmatched, backed away toward his horse. "I'll be back, Reid, with every man I've got. I'll burn your ranch to ashes." He mounted with difficulty, pain contorting his features. "You're already dead. You just don't know it yet." As Blackwood rode away, dust trailing behind him, Matthew knelt beside the girl. Up close, he could see she couldn't be more than 23. Her face, though bruised, held a stubborn defiance. "Can you stand, miss?" he asked. "Emma," she whispered. "Emma Carter." Matthew helped her to her feet, then onto his horse. The sky was turning blood red as the sun began to set, the horizon darkening with the promise of a dust storm. "A storm's coming from 2 directions," Matthew said, mounting behind her, "and I'm not sure which one's worse." Matthew's ranch sat on a small hill overlooking the surrounding plains, a strategic position that wasn't by accident. The main house, built of a sturdy timber and stone, faced east. A barn and corral stood to the north, and a smokehouse to the south. Everything was positioned to give clear sight lines in all directions. It wasn't just a ranch. It was a fortress for a man who understood danger. Inside, Emma sat at the kitchen table, while Matthew cleaned her wounds with whiskey and powders he'd carried since the war. His movements were precise, clinical, betraying his experience with battlefield injuries. That man, Emma said, wincing as the alcohol bit into her cuts. Blackwood, he bought me from my stepfather after mother died. My real father owned the bank in Fort Worth before the Panic of '73 took everything. Matthew nodded, not asking for details she wasn't ready to give. He'd seen enough of the world's cruelty to fill in the blanks. "You'll be safe here," he said, though both knew it might be a lie. He showed her to a small bedroom, once his daughter's, then went to check his weapons. His arsenal was modest but effective. The Winchester '73 that had served him well that afternoon, a Colt single-action Army revolver that rode on his hip, and an old Springfield rifle from his war days. Each weapon was meticulously maintained, oiled, and ready. The next morning, Matthew took Emma to the barn and placed the Colt .45 in her hands. "Pull the hammer back all the way," he instructed. "Grip it firm. Aim for center mass. At close range, this gun doesn't know mercy." Emma's hands trembled at first, but steadied as she aimed at the bottles Matthew had arranged on the fence post. Her first shot missed. The second shattered glass. "Again," Matthew said. By noon, she was hitting more than missing, not from talent, but from the determination of someone who knew her life might depend on it. They were interrupted by the approach of a rider, not from the direction of town, but from the north. Matthew's hand moved to his holster, but relaxed when he recognized the visitor. Running Wolf dismounted with the fluid grace of a man born to the saddle. Despite his Comanche heritage, he wore a mixture of traditional clothing and settler garments. The two men clasped forearms in greeting, a warrior's acknowledgement. "You have trouble, my friend," Running Wolf said without preamble. "Blackwood gathers men. 12 guns, including those who rode in the Chalk Creek killings." Matthew's jaw tightened. "How long?" 2 days. Maybe 3. Running Wolf's eyes moved to Emma, who stood on the porch, the Colt still in her hand. "The woman. She is why they come?" "Partly," Matthew replied. "The rest is old blood." Running Wolf nodded. He and Matthew shared history that went beyond words. They had fought on opposite sides until the Battle of Buffalo Wallow, where Matthew had pulled the wounded Comanche to safety when both were caught in the crossfire. They had saved each other that day, creating a bond that transcended the conflicts of their peoples. "I will ride with you," Running Wolf said simply. Matthew shook his head. "Your people need you. This isn't your fight. All fights against men like Blackwood are my fight." Running Wolf's expression hardened. "He sells rifles to young Apache warriors, stirs them to break treaties. He makes war to profit from it." Before Matthew could respond, dust on the horizon announced another visitor. This time, a wagon approached from the direction of town. William Cooper pulled his team to a halt in front of the house. At 60, Cooper was still barrel-chested and strong, his beard more salt than pepper. He climbed down stiffly, an old war wound that never healed right. "Heard there was excitement at the cemetery," Cooper said by way of greeting. "Figured you might need supplies." Matthew eyed the wagon, loaded with ammunition boxes and provisions. "That's a lot of supplies for a social call." Cooper spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "We weren't exactly friends when you wore gray and I wore blue, Reid. But things change. Man should be able to live free on his own land without vermin, like Blackwood causing trouble." The old enemies regarded each other for a long moment. Finally, Matthew extended his hand. Cooper took it with a firm grip. "We might need every gun we can get," Matthew admitted. Cooper nodded toward Emma. "The girl any good with that pistol?" "She's learning," Matthew replied. "She'd better learn fast," Cooper said grimly. "Blackwood doesn't leave witnesses." That night, as Matthew checked the perimeter of his property, Emma joined him on the porch. She had exchanged her torn dress for trousers and a shirt from Matthew's daughter's trunk. The clothes hung loose on her frame, but allowed her to move freely. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm carrying a child." Matthew's step faltered, but he didn't turn to look at her. "I don't know what I'll do," she continued. "A woman alone with a child has few options in this territory." Matthew remained silent for a long moment, then said, "This ranch is big enough for two. It'll be big enough for three." He finally turned to face her. "But first, we need to survive what's coming." Their conversation was cut short by the sound of approaching horses, 3 riders coming fast through the darkness. Matthew pushed Emma behind him, drawing his revolver in one fluid motion. "Get inside," he ordered. "Get the Winchester." The riders opened fire before they reached the property line. Bullets splintered the porch railing as Matthew dived for cover, returning fire with practiced precision. From the corner of his eye, he saw Cooper emerge from the barn, rifle raised. One of the attackers screamed as Cooper's shot found its mark, tumbling from his saddle. The other 2 split up, circling to approach from different angles. Matthew tracked one, waiting for the right moment. The crack of a rifle from the upstairs window caught everyone by surprise. One of the attackers jerked in his saddle, clutching his chest before falling. Emma had found her mark with the Winchester. The last rider, seeing his companions down, wheeled his horse and galloped away into the darkness. The sudden silence felt heavier than the gunfire. Cooper approached, rifle still at the ready. "That was just a test, to see how many guns you have." Matthew nodded, pressing a bandana against a graze on his arm where a bullet had come too close. "They'll be back with more men." Emma appeared in the doorway, the Winchester still clutched in her hands. In the moonlight, with her jaw set and eyes hard, she no longer looked like a victim. She looked like a survivor. "I'm not leaving," she said, answering a question no one had asked. The next 2 days were spent in preparation. Running Wolf scouted the surrounding area, reporting back on Blackwood's movements. Cooper brought more ammunition and helped fortify the ranch house. Matthew dug trenches and placed obstacles to funnel any attackers into kill zones. Sheriff Harmon rode in late on the second day, alone. He dismounted slowly, hands visible, aware of the rifles trained on him from various positions. "Came to warn you, Reid," he called. "Blackwood's offering $500 to anyone who brings him your head." Matthew stepped out onto the porch, keeping the sheriff in plain view. "That all you came to say, Sheriff?" Harmon shifted uncomfortably. "I can't send deputies out here. Town council won't allow it. They say it's a personal dispute." "And what do you say?" Matthew asked. "I say I've got a wife and children in town," Harmon replied, not meeting Matthew's eyes. "I say Blackwood has friends in high places." Matthew studied the sheriff, noting the way his gaze darted around the property, assessing defenses and positions. "I understand, Sheriff. A man has to protect his family." After Harmon departed, Cooper emerged from his hiding spot behind the barn. "He's Blackwood's man. Came to scout our defenses." "I know," Matthew said. "That's why we're changing everything tonight." They worked through the night, rearranging barricades, shifting firing positions, and setting false targets. Cooper brought dynamite from his mining days, which they placed strategically along likely approach routes. As dawn broke on the third day, they took their positions and waited. Running Wolf had reported that Blackwood had gathered 15 men, gunfighters, outlaws, and mercenaries drawn by the promise of easy money and revenge. Matthew found Emma checking the loads in her revolver and rifle. "Stay in the cellar," he told her. "There's a tunnel that leads to the creek bed. If things go wrong—" "I'm not running," she interrupted. "Not again." Matthew recognized the look in her eyes, the same one he'd seen in soldiers who had decided their ground was worth dying for. He didn't argue further. The attack came at noon, when the sun was highest and shadows were scarce. Riders approached from multiple directions, kicking up dust clouds as they came. The first wave fell to carefully placed shots from Cooper's position in the windmill and Running Wolf's hide in the rocks east of the house. The second wave dismounted and advanced on foot, using the terrain for cover. Matthew picked his targets carefully, making each shot count. Emma proved her worth, covering the approach to the barn with deadly accuracy that surprised even Cooper. But Blackwood had numbers on his side. As the afternoon wore on, the attackers pressed closer to the house. A stick of dynamite cleared one group that had taken cover in the irrigation ditch, but others kept coming. Running Wolf took a bullet in the leg but continued firing from his position. Cooper ran low on ammunition and had to abandon the windmill for a closer position. Matthew was forced back to the house as bullets chewed through the outer defenses. As the sun began to set, Blackwood made his move. While his remaining men provided covering fire, he and two others used the growing shadows to approach the house from the blind side. They breached through a window that had been shattered by gunfire. Matthew met them in the narrow hallway, firing twice and dropping one instantly. The second attacker got off a shot that caught Matthew in the side, spinning him against the wall. Through a haze of pain, he saw Blackwood advancing, a savage grin on his face. "Told you I'd be back, Reid," Blackwood said, leveling his pistol. A shot rang out, not from Matthew's gun, but from behind Blackwood. The outlaw staggered forward, a look of surprise replacing his grin as blood bloomed on his chest. Emma stood in the doorway to the cellar, her Colt smoking in her steady hand. Blackwood turned, firing wildly. His shot went wide as Matthew lunged forward, knocking the outlaw against the wall. Both men crashed to the floor, grappling for control of Blackwood's gun. Despite his wound, Matthew's strength and training gave him the advantage. He pinned Blackwood's gun hand to the floor, but the outlaw drew a knife with his free hand, slashing at Matthew's face. Matthew jerked back, losing his grip. Blackwood scrambled to his feet, aiming his revolver at Matthew's head. "You're out of bullets, Reid," Blackwood panted, blood staining his shirt. "Out of luck, too." Matthew's hand moved to his holster. "First lesson in the cavalry," he said calmly. "Always keep one bullet in reserve." His Colt cleared leather, and the final shot echoed in the confined space. Blackwood stood motionless for a moment, a look of disbelief on his face as a dark hole appeared between his eyes. Then he crumpled to the floor, his own unfired gun clattering beside him. "Should have killed you first," Blackwood whispered, and then was still. Outside, the shooting had stopped. The surviving attackers, seeing their leader fall, lost their appetite for the fight. They retreated into the gathering darkness, leaving their dead behind. Dawn painted the eastern sky with fingers of gold and crimson. Matthew sat on the porch steps, his side bandaged, watching as Cooper and Running Wolf dug graves for the fallen, friend and foe alike. "This is the law of the West," Cooper said, driving his shovel into the hard earth. "We fight, but we still bury our dead." Running Wolf, his wounded leg bound with strips of cloth, performed a Comanche blessing over the graves. "It was not for the dead," he explained, "but for the living, to release them from the weight of taking life." Emma brought coffee and sat beside Matthew. In the clear morning light, with the immediate danger past, they could finally see each other as people, not just allies in survival. "What happens now?" she asked. Matthew looked out over his land, the damaged barn, the bullet-riddled windmill, the fresh graves, then back to Emma, with her determined eyes and the new life growing inside her. "We rebuild," he said simply. "We live." In the distance, a lone rider approached, Sheriff Harmon coming to assess the aftermath. Matthew didn't reach for his gun. Some battles were fought with bullets, others with the simple determination to endure. "In this land," Matthew said, watching the approaching rider, "honor isn't what you say. It's what you do when facing down a loaded gun." Emma nodded, understanding the truth in his words. They sat together in silence as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the Texas plain. Shadows that, like the darkness they had faced together, would eventually give way to light. The end.